Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Niall Devins. Thanks, Dan, for inviting me to speak today. Unlike Paul, I haven't driven a fire engine around the world, but I have managed to get a southeastern train from southeast London, which got me here at the time. Almost as impressive. Just by way of background, I came to London in 1997, having spent 3 years in Bermuda working in the insurance industry. The first job that I took when I came to London was with a very small investment boutique called Zorn Hemsley, which was basically 10 people focused on raising money for the insurance marketplace. The market cap of the business at that time was less than £10 million. A number of people thought that I'd made quite an odd choice, especially given that I had a job offer from Bankers Trust, which was acquired by Deutsche Bank for 10 billion the next year. And I was also at a late stage interview with Merrill Lynch, and actually rang Merrill Lynch to cancel my third scheduled interview in order to take the job with Zorn Hemsley. Many of you might be wondering why I made that choice, and the answer leads nicely into the first thing that I look for when I'm assessing an investment opportunity, and basically that is leadership. Despite the fact that Bankers and Merrills were both far better known and far better resourced than Zorn had one thing that the others did not, and that was a chief executive called Oliver Hemsley, who started his career at Lloyd's of London. He quickly figured out that the path to true making his fortune was going to be through equity ownership. So he asked his company if he could take an equity stake in the business. And when they refused, at the age of 24, he left and set up his own investment banking business, which, given that his background was in insurance underwriting, was quite a big leap to take. He was definitely a man in a hurry, I would say, and to this day, in my 20 years in the city, I've met very few people who have his drive, his focus, his ambition, but above all, his leadership abilities. He was completely committed, and he was the first person in the office every day at 6:30. He was a very strong leader and a strong motivator of people. He knew how to read people very well, and he also knew how to get the best out of them. He knew the insurance place inside out, but what he spotted was beyond the insurance marketplace. He spotted an opportunity to grow something much bigger and much better than the market incumbents. And he set about building an investment bank across multiple different sectors. And that investment bank today is known as Numis, which is the leading investment bank in the small and mid-company space. With this plan in mind, he was smart enough to know that he didn't have the skill set to deliver everything on his own, so he set about building a team of strong people about him. And one of the key factors behind the success of Numis was equity ownership. Oliver had a real ethos of equity ownership in the business. I think I was less than 6 months in the business when I got my first share option award, which I barely knew what it meant at that stage, to be perfectly honest. I remember one of the things he said to me early in the business. He said, "Judge me by the number of millionaires that I make." Now, I've never actually sat down to count how many millionaires came from Numis, but I would guess that the number is somewhere in the region of 30 plus, which is not bad for a business that started life with less than 10 employees and a single-digit market cap in the millions. Now, I'm not saying he did it on his own, because he certainly didn't, because he wasn't the only one at his desk at 6:30 in the morning. But I firmly believe that without his leadership abilities and skills, that business would not have been anything like the success that it is today. And to this day, it's the second best financial investment I've ever made. And to this day, the first thing I do when I'm looking at a business is I ask myself whether I think the CEO has what it takes to deliver on the vision and the business plan which they've presented, and more importantly, whether I think they've got the personality and the skills to be a great leader with a great team. Because without that great team behind you, there's no way you're going to deliver on your plan. Now, if that was my second best investment, then my best investment was definitely in a company called Purple Bricks, which I'm sure most of you will have heard of. In 2014, which is only 5 years ago, I was lucky enough to help Purple Bricks when they came to me looking for £3 million of seed investment. At that time, the company was valued at £4.9 million. I was even luckier to make the decision to invest in that company personally. I remember afterwards somebody asked me, why did you make that investment? And I also remember the answer that I gave. During the transaction, the CEO's father passed away tragically at a young age, and I went to the funeral in Birmingham. And I remember being in the reception afterwards, and the CEO was standing at the bar with his laptop open, responding to questions from the VC investors and from the lawyers, because the transaction was at that stage where it was just about to close. And it was at that moment that I thought, you know what, if he's prepared to go to this length at his own father's funeral, then I could do a lot worse than invest some of my money with him. And as I said, that was the best financial decision I've ever made to this day. Just to put that into perspective, the company was valued at £4.9 million at that stage, and it peaked with a market cap of 1.4 billion within 4 years. So a phenomenal return for everybody. Sorry, this is my PowerPoint answer. So just staying with Purple Bricks for a moment, the fact that Michael Bruce was prepared to work at his father's funeral, that wasn't the only sign that this might actually be quite a successful investment. In my experience, not all early stage businesses are as prepared as others. Many come to the table looking to raise money with nothing more than a 20-page investor deck and a rudimentary financial model. It's unusual in my recent experience to see a detailed business plan which clearly sets out the vision and how that vision is going to be delivered. You've probably guessed that this was not the case with Purple Bricks. They had a 60 or 70-page business plan which went into tremendous detail about what it was they were trying to achieve, how they were going to achieve it, and why they thought they would be successful. They had also gone so far as to take a video camera into the street and interview members of the general public as to what they thought about being able to buy or sell a house online, which at that time was quite a novel concept. And in addition to that, Michael Bruce, the CEO, who was not a rich man at that time, took 50% of his own net worth and plowed it into developing an advertising campaign which he had in the can, ready to go on TV, subject only to being able to raise money from investors to fund that TV campaign. And that was one of the other key validators for me. I like to see founders that put real skin in the game. And by convincing his wife to allow him to put 50% of their wealth in the business, that for me was an important tick in the box. Now, moving on from Purple Bricks, I think one of the areas which I commonly find when looking at early stage or growth businesses is that they fail to clearly define their marketplace. I think a lot of people think that if there's a big number in the presentation, then that's going to be enough to get the money. You know, it's one thing having a $700 billion global industry in your presentation, but you know that might be the size of the global beauty industry. But if you've got face cream, then that's not your market. In actual fact, your market's going to be not even 185 billion for the skincare marketplace. It's going to be far, far less, depending on what your actual product is, which niche category it fits into, which geographies you're operating in, and what market share you can realistically expect to achieve. So just looking at the TAM alone is not enough. You've got to look at your serviceable addressable marketplace and your serviceable obtainable marketplace. And in actual fact, I far prefer to see smaller numbers in a business plan than bigger numbers. Because what it shows to me is that you've clearly thought about who your audience is and who your target is. So for me, that's something that I always look for. And if I see that, then I'm far more likely to make an investment, because I know that you're probably going to take that discipline and planning into other areas of the business as well. One of the other things that I look for, this isn't a deal breaker, but one of the other things that I look for is whether or not you've got the potential to be a market leader in your field. The three most successful investments I've ever made, the companies have, without exception, all grown into market leaders in their field. The first was Numis, Purple Bricks was another, and the third one is a company called Gusto, which you may or may not have heard of. But Gusto has recently become the #1 meal kit recipe business in the UK. And again, it's amazing how many of the same traits and reasons appear across that business as across the others. The first being great leadership, the second being great product, the third being differentiating themselves from the competition. And they've done that by giving customers a far better choice by using data science, and also they've put greater automation and artificial intelligence into their business to give customers what it is that they want. Now, I've talked about my good investments, and it's not that I haven't had any bad investments, because I have had a few of those as well. But I think it's as important, if not more important, to look at the bad investments, because I think you probably learn more from those than you do from the good ones. I think it's probably fair to say that without exception, in hindsight, there were warning signals along the way that were I looking at those investments today, I probably would not invest. The first one, which is a bear bug, is that a lot of companies are unprepared to have in-depth discussions about sales performance. Now, investors understand that sales development takes time, but that doesn't mean that you have to avoid the topic. I think what you do need to be able to do is to clearly articulate where you are in the sales process, in the sales cycle. You need to be able to clearly explain why there's a lag in sales or why there's an underperformance in sales. I think investors prefer honesty every time, even if it's a case that the truth is not great. And I think this is true for all areas of business and not just sales. You know, in a lot of cases, companies that are not prepared to give straight answers to questions should be avoided, in my experience. And I think it's fair to say that if I had stuck to that rule, my performance would probably be a lot better than it is today. Another area which I always look for is how well companies understand their KPIs. The number of times I've had disappointing conversations around how many website visits have you had, how many unique visitors, how many sales leads, what's your conversion rate, what's your CAC, what's your LTV, and it's probably no great surprise that the companies that are on top of those numbers, they monitor them religiously and they know them off by heart, and if you ask a question they can give it to you straight away without even looking at a piece of paper. And of course the not so good investment are the ones which try and beat around the bush and not give you the straight answer. And it's not just so much about where those KPIs are today, it's where they're trending. If you can see that things are moving in the right direction, investors understand that and they're prepared to take a chance on that. But it's the companies that don't monitor these things closely enough. For example, I was at an investor pitch recently for a consumer product, and I asked the CEO or the chairman, I think it was, what was his NPS, his net performance score, and he very proudly told me how good it was, and then he almost equally proudly he said, "We've only just started monitoring this, you know, until recently we've never heard of it." Needless to say, I did not invest in that company. A few other things that I'd like to touch on before I finish. Competition, very important to clearly understand who your competition is and what you do that is different for them. What are you going to do that means that you're going to take market share from them? If I don't understand that, then frankly, why would I invest in a business? There's just no reason. Marketing spend is something that I like to focus on as well. It's very easy to waste an awful lot of money on an ill-advised marketing campaign. A lot of companies talk about marketing campaigns and how they're going to gain so many new customers from their latest and greatest Facebook campaign. Two comments about this. One, be very wary of expensive ad campaigns promising big rewards. If you don't have the expertise in-house, make sure you get it externally and make sure it comes well recommended. And also be extremely wary of committing large amounts of money up front. It's much better to test things on a micro basis and figure out what works for you, your company, your product, before you go all in. Valuation is another thing that I have become more and more focused on over the years. In the past, I have made investments where you take $1 billion idea and you think, well, if it's 40 million today, I can still make 50 times my money. Surely that's enough. But in actual fact, you've got to focus on valuation as an investor, because I know that the management team and the founders need to be incentivized. So I'm not talking about a situation where there's a loss of control or where there's so little equity left over that it's not worth their while. I'm talking about the worst performing investments in the portfolio, where valuations are based more on hype than they are on reality. And when that happens and you don't pay attention to valuation on the way in, and when reality bites, as it invariably does, then it's followed by a down round. And that is not good for anybody. It's not good for the investors, and it's not good for the company. And it's very difficult to recover from a down round. So I think it's important that valuations are justifiable and that they fairly reflect where you are today and not blue sky tomorrow, because people need to understand, companies need to understand that investors need to make a fair return, because ultimately they're the ones who are putting the capital at risk. A couple of other additional small points. One is the speed with which companies respond to investor questions and information requests. If you're not getting a response quickly, in my experience, there's a reason for that. And it's either that the information is not there, which means the company are probably not monitoring the correct KPIs, or they're fighting a fire somewhere else in the business. Even if you have to put together the information, you've got to tell investors what the timeline to expectation is and then deliver against that timeline. It's not a great way to start a relationship if you're not getting back to your investors in a timely fashion. Another point that I look for is who are the other shareholders on the share register. It's not a deal breaker, this one, but it can be very instructive to see whether there's somebody from the industry who thinks that it's a good idea, whether they've put their money where their mouth is, and also whether they've got valuable contacts that could be of great value to the company. For example, back to Purple Bricks again, one of the investors in the seed round was a chap called Paul Pinder, who was the former chairman of Capita, which was one of the best performing stocks on the stock exchange ever. I think it grew from about 60 million to about 7.5 billion during his time as chairman. He had a big following of fund managers in the city, and one of the first things he did when he came on board Purple Bricks and put in his own money and became chairman, he took the business almost straight away after closing the seed round and took them around the city, and within 3 or 4 months of closing the seed round, they had a £10 million check from a well-known fund manager to allow them to continue with their TV ad campaign, which had been producing some great results. But he knew from day one that they were going to need access to a lot of money. By having him on the share register, you knew that that money was going to be available if the results were good. And one final point, and this is a post-investment point. You can tell a good company from a bad company by the ease of getting information from that company post-investment. The good companies are the ones that give investors updates on a regular basis, be it twice a year or ideally on a quarterly basis. The number of times in the past where I've put money into companies and you hear absolutely nothing for 12 or 18 months until, surprise, surprise, they need to raise money again, that is such a no-no. So that is everything that I have to say today. Happy to take any questions as needs be.
Brilliant, thanks, Noel.